I'm going to talk about publishers and publishing, and I will be focusing on questions of scholarly publishing and scholarly publishers. And I should also say, just to make it extremely clear, that I'm not speaking for the scholarly publishing industry as a whole. That may be clear from my title, but I think it's important to point out that amongst scholarly publishers there are some very different views around these issues, and we certainly do not speak with one voice. And there are some of my colleagues, as Paul's already pointed out, he is a publisher, Brian Hole is also in the audience. So the publishers who are here may wish to express whether they do or not disagree or agree with me. So I want to talk about myths. And myths and mythic, it's a big kind of word, a big kind of conception. There are different kinds of myths. There are the kinds of myths that are fantastic, perhaps terrifying creatures that come to us from some deep sense of perhaps the past or our background or our culture. There are myths or stories such as that of Troy, which have some basis, in fact, in truth, that there is a city of Troy. It did go to war with the Greeks. Whether or not there was, in fact, a wooden horse that was wheeled in through the gates is a matter of some conjecture. But these are useful in the sense of helping us to dig deeper into the past. So these are not the kinds of myths I want to talk about today. The myths I want to talk about today are largely superstitions, things that people have assumed to be true, and things that often betray a fear which is not quite completely acknowledged and talked about. So let's talk about the first of these. So I work for PLOS. My job is advocacy director. I'm also, up until 14 months ago, was a researcher in a UK government research institution, so I am a recovering academic as well. So I wanted to focus on from the perspective of service of our users. We often hear this thing that researchers aren't asking for text and data mining, they don't seem to want it. And this is, of course, garbage. So this is some examples of me looking for information and the way that I look for information. In this particular case, I was looking for what is the first name of the organism called R. eutropha. And you'll note that the answer is given to me by Google by typing in R. eutropha, and that, in fact, the source of that information is Wikipedia in practice. But this is text mining. This is Google working over the web to answer a question I have about my needs as a researcher. Here's a second one. I'm looking for some data in this case, trying to figure out where to find some data on the structure of Clathrin. Again, I type it in, I click on a link. I'm taken directly to the place where the data is available. Note at this stage, I have not touched a piece of the scholarly literature. I'm being taken almost around it and away from it because of the way the information flows on the web work in practice. And here's another one. I'm looking again for some data, but now I'm looking for some data across multiple experiments, across, in fact, multiple articles, across a whole sort of space. And I'm getting a whole bunch of papers, most of which I don't have access to. I'm not getting very good results. And I'm not getting very good results because the information I want to know is only available from scholarly articles. Whereas if we want some obviously much more important information, it's a lot easier. We have a problem. So as a researcher on a day-to-day basis, I needed text and data mining for the things I was doing. Those were the things I could think of, but also we need it on a day-to-day basis to do what we're doing better, to get the information to us more quickly. The problem is we keep asking for faster horses. Keep asking for better search, for better discovery tools. And they're getting there bit by bit, at least until Google shuts down Google Scholar. But we're not asking for TDM because we don't know what it is. As researchers, we tend not to know what it is that we don't have in terms of our tool sets. So this is point one. This is myth number one. Here's myth number two. Something that's been said by a couple of publishers from time to time. This is our Google Analytics on PLOS 1 as of about 9:30 yesterday. So you can see 535 active users on the site. The little graph in the middle is showing that we're getting about, on average at this time of day, about 200 page impressions per minute for this journal. This is the one of our 7 journals, one of our 8 websites, but the one with the most traffic. You can see if you look really closely, most of the traffic's coming directly from Google. Second biggest source of traffic is an academic search engine in the biomedical literature. So this is about sort of how things are turning over on a day-to-day basis. If we look at this on a larger scale, this is the PLOS 1 traffic over 6 months. I'm now showing you page views. Actually, that should be per hour, sorry, on the left-hand side. And each of those lumps is a week. So, you know, actually researchers do go home over the weekend, it turns out. It's fairly regular, it's fairly predictable. But there are spikes in there, and this spike here is kind of interesting. That's pretty big, pretty sudden, pretty unexpected. This comes from Reddit. Sometimes these spikes, we see about one of these spikes a month, roughly speaking. They tend to come from either BBC News, Reddit, which is a site where people aggregate links that they find amusing, interesting, powerful. Also Slashdot is another source of these spikes very commonly, and sometimes Wikipedia, in fact, is also a source. This is, you know, something that was of interest to a large community on Reddit and led to a significant number of people coming to our website to understand what this particular claim, what was the background behind it, what was the story behind it, what was the actual research in this case, which was talking about how exercise could in fact inhibit the growth of prostate cancer cells. Interesting piece of research, but also of wide public interest. So this is what that traffic looked like, again, on a per hour basis. So we were peaking at around 22,000 hits per hour. You can do the maths. In fact, the peak load rate was, you know, around 400 or 500 hits per second. Those of you who actually run real large websites will realise those are actually not terribly big numbers. But they're sizable for us, and that represents kind of the peak sort of average load that we might see under normal circumstances. So here's a graph of that kind of thing. So you've got our daily average, daily peak, and these kind of Reddit spikes. We can cope with at least tenfold the Reddit spike. Easy. That's before we put in any countermeasures, any issues whatsoever. Now, we do have problems with really serious internet events like distributed denial of service attacks, and they might, I made this number up, but that's a sort of reflection of what the kind of load you might see on a website under a distributed denial of service attack. In fact, the problems we normally have are to do with someone's robot online going mad, or more normally actually upstream DNS problems have been an issue for us from time to time. But we do see events from time to time that slow our servers down. Sometimes this takes us 60 minutes to 90 minutes to fix, to get the fixes in place, to solve the problem and get things back up to normal speed. So where does text mining fit in this as a kind of sense of how much damage that's going to be able to do to our responsiveness? So I'll show you the text mining. Yes, the slide has advanced. We need to zoom in a bit, or in fact, rather quite a lot. That's a text miner by comparison with our normal load. It's trivial. 10,000, 100,000 people simultaneously hitting our site for the purpose of text or data mining would be well within our load capabilities. Why is that the case? Well, actually, you've already seen one of these things. This is the robots.txt file for PLOS 1. This is a file which is on every properly run website, which tells people what they're allowed to do, and it sets some guidance. If you're doing automated engagement with a website, how often you should hit it. And actually, we have a quite conservative crawl delay. So what we're saying here is if you hit our website with an automated agent, Before you do it again, can you please wait 30 seconds? Now, text miners and data miners are amongst the most polite people on the web. They do what you ask them to do. Where we have problems, it's actually with people doing security checks at universities mostly, it turns out, because they unleash robots across the university network and make a mess of things for the most part. And we find them, we realise that we're getting a bunch of things from one IP address, we throttle it down, we close it down, solve the problem, job done. This may seem harsh, but it's true. I'm sorry, if you cannot manage text mining, you should not be in the business of running a modern website. Myth 3. And this is kind of coming from the business perspective. So PLOS is a not-for-profit based in Cambridge. We have just under 200 staff now. Just published progress update that has 2012 financials in it if you want to have a look. We turned over $37 million last year. And we have a reasonable surplus, operating surplus on that. So we are financially viable in what we do. It is the case that Clay Shirky's sort of throwaway bon mot that publishing is no longer an industry, it's now a button. That's simplifying things a bit, but it's not simplifying them a whole lot in many ways. But the point is that publishing per se is no longer our unique selling point. Anybody can put something up on the web. The practice of making it public is not something that is uniquely valuable that we do as a publisher anymore. I think there's also some other things that have changed. Really, our business isn't about filtering, because if we tell someone to go away, they'll put it somewhere else. They'll find another journal in many cases, or in any case it can go up online. And we can't really stop that. What it is, it's about annotation. It's about saying when you see something in our journal, it's gone through a particular process, it's got a particular level of assessment that it's gone through, that it's got that brand on it, let's be blunt, and that you can associate a certain level of trust with that branding. It's also no longer really about distribution. In the old world, publishing was about identifying where you were going to pack up a set of boxes of paper things and where you were going to send them to. Today it's about dissemination. It's about getting content out so that the majority of people can find it and use it. This is the real reason I've heard from a number of publishers. I'm just waiting for Peter to put his head up. And I think this really cuts to the chase of what it is to be a modern publisher in the scholarly, learned publishing area. So the concern here is, for anyone who doesn't know Peter, he's sitting here. The irony of this is that Peter is probably the one person in academia who is most diligent about determining exactly what rights he has and exactly what he's allowed to do with content. But it's slightly problematic that a major multi-billion-dollar company will take the view that there is someone who is a retired academic who has access to the web, who can do better at their job than they can. And this really cuts to the chase of what it is to be a scholarly publisher in the 21st century in a web-based world. Our core business is to get the content of the authors who come to us, who pass through our review process, in the hands of those people who can use it, whether they are researchers or companies or patients or parents or environmental activists. That is what our job is, to take what is largely a public good created by public investment and maximise the widest impact of it. So how do we do this at PLOS, and what's our approach to this, and where can we do better in the future? Because we're not so far down this road that I would claim we were doing this as well as we can. So the first is that, along with a group, in fact the group of the fastest growing publishers in the scholarly sector, we only publish open access material. So we don't have a legacy business that we have to think about how to transition into this new world. That gives us a lot of advantages, and the reason we got into open access to start with was obviously because the motivation was to make things available in the broadest possible way. We use particular kinds of licensing. We use Creative Commons Attribution License. Other publishers like Biomed Central have also started applying the CC0 public domain dedication for data, which is again an interesting step. Why are we using these legal tools, particularly in context of John's comments? Why do we use these legal tools? Well, we use these legal tools to try and give people the confidence that they are able to do something. We see these as enablers. Would we rather that copyright wasn't involved in this process at all? Probably. It's an interesting conversation to have. Certainly we put content on the web that is copyrightable, and some of the uses of that involve copying wholesale. And so there is a place for copyright to be considered here, certainly. But the purpose for us of using legal tools and licensing is to create and enable certainty and confidence in what someone can do. But I just wanted to really touch on what was said here. Licensing isn't sufficient in and of itself. For one reason of many. This is the location, the address of the authors of papers that PLOS has published in the last 3 months just from the Wellcome Trust. 70 or 80 countries, each with their own copyright regime, probably, possibly in many cases subject to multiple copyright regimes, if you're in the EU, for instance. Some of them completely incompatible. The little point that we sometimes forget about, the CC0 waiver, which many of us like for data because it does reduce all these doubts, can't be used in New Zealand. Sorry. Is a big issue. If we want to enable global use and a global research environment, we have to have mechanisms which are globally working. And individual licensing in one place or another place is not going to do that. We also need to talk about data. We need to talk about the technical mechanisms by which we make the data available. I don't think at PLOS we are terribly good at this at the moment. We're working on it. We'd like to make the data within the papers more easily accessible, better marked up, more usable. At the end of the day, other people are doing a lot of this for us. So trying to control the content that we publish is in direct tension with the dissemination process if someone else is going to make the discovery tools for us. So enabling text and data mining is a core part of our business for scholarly publishers in serving the customers, for us who are the authors, as well as the downstream users, who are a very important part of the value proposition we have for our authors. And it will also become probably one of the key market differentiators in a proper competitive market for scholarly publishing. And I'll stop there.